There are many different types of minor scales: harmonic minor, melodic minor, minor pentatonic, natural minor, Japanese scale, Byzantine scale, gypsy scale, the list goes on. It's important to differentiate between these scales by understanding the intervals, meaning the distance between one note and another, and understanding which intervals exist in which of those tonalities. It's equally, if not more important, to understand what these sounds can do for you in different situations as you improvise on the guitar. So I'm going to show you a cool chord progression that is from a channel called Elevated Jam Tracks. You should check out if you're ever in the mood to jam over some awesome backing tracks. And I'm going to take this chord progression and utilize 3 of my most used minor scales in hopes that it will inspire you to not only learn these scale shapes and positions, but also compose your own melodies and solos and write your own music using this information. If you're interested in the actual scale diagrams and things like that, many more in-depth lessons on each of the different scales that I mentioned, as well as many others, check out Guitar Super System. It's linked right down below. Let's get started with my top 3 favorite minor scales, and then we'll get into how to move through them effectively. We're going to be in the key of D minor, the saddest of all keys, and we'll start with the trusty minor pentatonic. The minor pentatonic has 5 notes, 5 different positions across the guitar neck. I'm going to be showing you each of these in root position, but understand that for each note there is a respective position on the guitar neck to start from. So for example, say we take the 3rd note of the minor pentatonic scale. That is a G, and we start from that position and play those exact same notes, just starting from the G. You can understand now how positions work and how they can be useful. Obviously, neck access and things of that nature. So, moving on to the next most useful minor scale, in my opinion, the natural minor. If you'll notice, the natural minor scale actually contains the minor pentatonic scale notes. It just adds in this 2nd note and this flat 6th note. So, with that in mind, we can already start to understand the interval differences. So for the minor pentatonic, the intervals are as follows. Adding those 2 notes from the natural minor scale, we have... Pretty nifty, huh? Now, let's move on to the 3rd and final scale that I find most useful in a minor context, the harmonic minor scale. Now that is a very identifiable scale, and you may have noticed there's only one difference between that scale and the natural minor scale. It is indeed that major 7th, that raised 7th interval that gives it that sort of Middle Eastern Egyptian vibe. We have now the 3 scales that I'm going to utilize in order to improvise in an interesting way, in my opinion, over a backing track that is in D minor. And there are obviously many different varieties of harmony that you can come across in your guitar journey, from something as simple as in which case, obviously the natural minor and the minor pentatonic would work great, but maybe the harmonic minor could have a little bit of rub due to that raised 7th. So in that case, you would certainly want to avoid that raised 7th unless you like that sound. It's having that bass foundation understanding that will allow you to move around harmony in a way that makes sense to the listener. So when you hear any sort of chord progression, try and figure out exactly what notes are happening, which intervals are happening as far as the chords go versus the scales that you're playing. And that is going to take your note selection and your choices to an entirely different level because you'll be more aware musically of what's going on. And it's not a very difficult thing to do. It just takes a little bit, again, of awareness and analysis to figure out what fits, like a puzzle. And so it's with that that I will introduce a chord progression now that is a little bit more busy than that chord progression, but as a result it allows for a lot of different exploration among these three different scales. So as you can see, it really helps to know the triad aspect of the harmony because it not only identifies the most integral notes of each chord that's passing by, it gives you a foundation to target those specific notes over the different chord changes based on what you like the sound of. So now that we have that as our sort of frame of mind, we can now identify these different scales and where one scale might work better than the other. So over the first chord, it's just a D minor. So any one of these scales are going to work. But really the harmonic minor I would recommend saving until there's an actual harmonic minor note that obviously exists in some of those chords. And obviously you know what I mean by harmonic minor note, right? That raised seventh. So in this case, it's a C sharp. And you'll notice in this chord, there is no C sharp. So we would do well to stick to either a pentatonic or natural minor for this part. And you can start really simply just by identifying certain notes that you like the sound of. So I would say my personal preferences are like a flat 7, or the major second, or minor third always works. So any one of those, just start as simple as one note and you can go through the harmony that way, just one note per chord. And then from there, you can start to add in more notes and vary your rhythms a bit so that you can form actual licks, but in your mind you know that it's really built upon one note or two notes per chord, and those are notes that you are specifically targeting. That is really the key to improvisation in my eyes, is notes that you like the sound of and you can pick and choose them at will. Understanding where they come from and why they work is the next echelon of guitar playing, but really this basic understanding is all a lot of people really need. So from there we have a lot of different directions to go, obviously. I'll show you another example of choosing a different scale over a different chord. For example, we have this turnaround chord, which is an E minor 7 flat 5. And that is obviously the 7th diatonic chord of F major, which is where D minor is derived from. And then it comes to the very last chord in the progression in A7. And that's an awesome chord for harmonic minor because that is where the Phrygian dominant sound comes from. So that's the traditional harmonic minor shape. So with that at your disposal, you can target harmonic minor over this progression just during the turnaround, and then you can sprinkle it in maybe over some of those diminished passing chords that were sprinkled in as well. We have this D minor, and then we have a C sharp diminished. So if you notice, that C sharp note is present, so we could. And then when the C major comes, That's the natural minor. And then we're coming down to another passing diminished sound. Back to B flat major. So you can see it really sort of paints its own picture. The tonality and the harmony is really suggesting where you can go, and you almost don't need the harmony to happen if you're improvising effectively. And this is a lot how jazz guitar players improvise, is you can hear the harmony as they're playing even if the harmony's gone. And that has a lot to do with targeting specific notes that highlight certain elements of the chords. And after that, man, it's a long journey. But this is a really fundamental lesson for learning to improvise beyond just the box shape level that you may be comfortable with. So a lot of people would improvise over that progression and sound great if they're just using the minor pentatonic or just using the natural minor. But obviously there's plenty more available to us if we want, and this is just a testament to that truth. So I'm gonna rip a little something using the concepts that I outlined in this lesson. If you're interested in learning way more in-depth lessons on these sorts of scales and improvising tips and tricks, then check out Guitar Super System. It's linked right down below. I hope you enjoyed this one. See you guys next time, but until then, keep shredding.